Empires usually fall when territory shrinks, armies retreat, and flags are lowered permanently. But Britain discovered retreat could be profitable if power learned to become invisible. Instead of ruling land, it learned to rule flows. Money, unlike armies, did not require borders. After empire, Britain faced a dangerous question about survival in a changing global order. How do you remain powerful without colonies, without conquest, without visible domination? The answer wasn't force, industry, or nationalism. The answer was finance, quiet, technical, and deliberately misunderstood. Britain realized money didn't need to stay at home to remain under control. It only needed legal shelter, favorable rules, and strategic distance from scrutiny. Thus began the offshore experiment, not accidental, not chaotic, but carefully engineered. A blueprint drawn in law books, not maps. Small islands, once ignored by empire, suddenly gained extraordinary importance overnight. Places with no armies, no industry, and no political influence became financial giants. They offered secrecy, low taxes, and legal protection, but their true power came from British design. Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man, and distant Caribbean territories shared one feature. They operated under British legal influence, without British political responsibility. This separation was intentional, not coincidental. It created plausible deniability with absolute control. Britain allowed these jurisdictions autonomy, while embedding English law deeply within them. Courts, contracts, and financial practices mirrored London's logic precisely. Money flowed outward, but authority remained centralized. The illusion of independence protected the system from criticism. Corporations discovered they could shift profits into these territories effortlessly. Revenue vanished from high-tax countries and reappeared offshore, legally protected. Nothing illegal occurred, only strategic compliance. Britain transformed loopholes into infrastructure. Banks, law firms, and accountants became architects of this new invisible empire. They designed structures ordinary people could never understand fully. Complexity became camouflage, shielding wealth behind technical language. Ignorance ensured obedience. Governments publicly condemned tax avoidance, while quietly enabling it through treaties and silence. Britain perfected this duality, moral outrage paired with legal permission. Criticism targeted companies, never the system itself. Responsibility dissolved across jurisdictions. London remained the command center of this offshore universe. Deals were structured in the city, then executed elsewhere. Money moved through islands, but answered to British standards. Control without appearance became Britain's signature strategy. Developing nations suffered most from this system. Their resources generated profits that vanished offshore before taxation occurred. Public services weakened, while foreign investors prospered. Britain extracted value without extraction. Western corporations embraced offshore finance as competitive necessity rather than greed. Avoiding taxes meant higher shareholder returns and market dominance. The system rewarded participation and punished restraint. Britain made avoidance rational. Offshore jurisdictions marketed themselves as neutral, technical, and efficient. They avoided politics, ideology, and public debate intentionally. Finance operated best in silence. Britain ensured silence remained profitable. When scandals exposed offshore secrecy, reforms targeted symptoms, not architecture. Registers appeared, rules tightened, but structure survived intact. Money adapted faster than regulation. The blueprint proved resilient. Britain's greatest achievement was convincing the world offshore finance was unavoidable. Once capital became mobile, taxing it became optional. Governments adjusted expectations downward, sovereignty quietly surrendered. The system expanded beyond individuals to corporations, funds, trusts, and sovereign wealth. Trillions circulated beyond democratic oversight. Power shifted from voters to balance sheets. Britain understood this shift before anyone else. Offshore finance also protected wealth from political instability and redistribution. Elites insulated themselves from domestic consequences. Inequality hardened into permanence. Britain built walls money could cross, but people could not. Critics called tax havens immoral, unfair, and destructive. Britain replied with silence, legality, and technical defense. Morality mattered less than competitiveness, and competitiveness demanded secrecy. As globalization accelerated, offshore finance became structural rather than optional. Supply chains, investments, and ownership relied on it. Removing it threatened collapse. Britain made dependency irreversible. The offshore blueprint succeeded because it avoided visibility. No single law created it. No announcement revealed it. It emerged quietly, clause by clause. Britain never called it empire. It called it efficiency, flexibility, competitiveness. Words softened power. Language became the shield. Today, much of the world's wealth technically resides nowhere. It exists in jurisdictions designed to be unreachable. Taxes chase it unsuccessfully. Britain designed the maze. The question is no longer who owns the money. The question is who built the system hiding it. The answer leads repeatedly back to Britain. And the blueprint is still active. As offshore systems matured, Britain realized secrecy itself had become a tradable global commodity. Privacy, distance, and deniability were packaged, priced, and sold like financial products. Money sought invisibility, and Britain provided architecture. Power no longer needed flags, only legal insulation. Corporations reorganized ownership structures until profits became impossible to trace clearly. Subsidiaries owned subsidiaries, trusts owned companies, and paperwork dissolved accountability. Everything was legal, yet nothing was transparent. Britain perfected legality without responsibility. International treaties quietly reinforced this system harder than dismantling it. Double tax agreements ensured profits escaped taxation entirely in many cases. Governments competed to attract capital by lowering standards. Britain set the template for this race. Law firms played a crucial role, exporting British legal logic into offshore jurisdictions worldwide. They trained local courts, drafted statutes, and ensured compatibility with London's expectations. Judicial independence became performance, not reality. Authority flowed invisibly back to Britain. Banks routed transactions through offshore nodes to reduce exposure and oversight. Risk appeared distributed, while control remained concentrated. Losses were socialist, profits disappeared. Britain designed asymmetric outcomes. Politicians publicly condemned tax havens, while privately benefiting from their protection. Campaigns promised reform, yet legislation stalled endlessly. Complexity defeated outrage repeatedly. Britain relied on fatigue. Crises exposed the system briefly, then strengthened it unexpectedly. Panama Papers shocked the world, but capital adapted instantly. New jurisdictions replaced old ones. The blueprint evolved. Developing countries faced permanent revenue loss, weakening healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Capital flight became structural, not criminal. Debt replaced taxation as funding mechanism. Britain's credit empire expanded. Wealth concentration accelerated because offshore systems rewarded scale and sophistication. Ordinary citizens paid visible taxes. Elites paid invisible fees. Trust eroded quietly. Democracy weakened structurally. Britain maintained plausible deniability throughout, claiming limited control over offshore territories. Yet courts, currencies, and governance remained tethered to British authority. Responsibility floated outward, power stayed central. This imbalance defined success. Global institutions struggled to regulate a system designed to resist regulation inherently. Every rule produced loopholes. Every loophole produced industries. Enforcement lagged innovation. Britain anticipated this dynamic early. Offshore finance reshaped geopolitics subtly. shielding wealth from sanctions and accountability. Money escaped punishment, even when states faced consequences. Financial power decoupled from political power. Britain enabled this separation. Today, trillions circulate through entities with no employees, offices, or physical presence. They exist purely as legal constructs. Money became abstract shelter. Britain mastered abstraction. The offshore blueprint-proved empire could survive without territory, armies, or explicit domination. Systems outlived sovereignty. Influence became permanent. Britain won quietly. The greatest success lay in normalization. People accepted offshore finance as inevitable complexity. Questioning it felt naive. That acceptance was victory. Yet instability grows beneath the surface as states lose capacity to govern effectively. Public trust erodes, inequality hardens, resentment accumulates. The system protects capital, not society. Britain understood this trade-off. History shows systems built for efficiency eventually confront legitimacy crises. Offshore finance postponed that reckoning through distance and obscurity. But distance shrinks over time. Questions return. The offshore blueprint remains active, refined, and deeply embedded in global finance. Removing it would collapse markets, pensions, and governments simultaneously. Britain designed dependency as defense. That dependency endures. If this story changed how you see hidden money and power, remember, the strongest empires are the ones you cannot see. Subscribe for more untold histories of finance and control. Because the system shaping tomorrow is already operating quietly today.